There is a sentence my former mother-in-law said in a hotel ballroom that she cannot take back. She said it to the man who happened to be my largest business partner, and I was standing 6 feet away, holding a glass of champagne, at a party I had personally paid $65,000 to throw. My daughter was in the middle of her quinceañera waltz when Claudia Rivera leaned toward Robert Maines and told him, in her most gracious voice, that I had never been good with money, that a divorce court had agreed, that I was doing something small with apartments these days. What Robert said in response, and what the next 90 seconds did to Claudia Rivera's understanding of the last 9 years of her life, is the reason I am finally ready to tell this story. Stay with me. The waltz ends in a few minutes, and so does everything Claudia thought she knew about me. Welcome back to Twisted Betrayal Stories. If you are new here, this channel is for people who were handed someone else's verdict about their worth and went and built the answer. Instead, subscribe and don't go anywhere. My name is Alina Vargas. I am 41 years old. I run a real estate investment firm. And for 9 years before last Thursday, I let a woman named Claudia Rivera tell anyone who would listen that I was financially incompetent. I want to take you back to where that sentence came from, because you cannot understand what happened in that ballroom without understanding what happened in a courtroom 9 years earlier. I was 32 when my marriage to Marco Rivera ended. We had been married for 6 years. We had a daughter, Sophia, who was 5. The marriage ending was not the shock. The marriage had been ending by degrees for 2 years before either of us admitted it out loud. The shock was what Claudia did when we reached the part about dividing what we had accumulated. Marco's family came from construction. His father, Eduardo Rivera, had run Rivera Construction for 30 years, a mid-sized commercial operation working across 3 counties. Comfortable in the way that decades of steady work produces comfort. The house in Oakdale, the lake house used 3 times a year, the company name on the door. During the 6 years I was married into that family, I had worked. I want to be precise about that because Claudia would later suggest otherwise. I had a business administration degree I paid for myself. I had spent 4 years in commercial property management before Sophia was born, and then I stepped back to part-time because Marco's schedule required someone to be home more than 40 hours a week. We agreed it would be me. That was a decision we made together, in a kitchen, over coffee. I did not think it would be used against me 3 years later in a courtroom, but I had not yet learned how divorce works when one family has more lawyers than the other. The Rivera family hired a specialist, the kind who is very good at convincing judges that the non-earning spouse contributed less than she did. And Claudia, who had never once sat across a spreadsheet with me, who would not have known a cap rate from a kitchen cabinet, volunteered herself as a character witness. She sat in that courtroom in her good blazer and told the judge, carefully, with great sincerity, that I had demonstrated poor judgment with finances throughout the marriage, that I had never held what she would call a real position of responsibility, that she had genuine concerns about my ability to manage a substantial settlement independently. Poor judgment with finances. Never held a real position of responsibility, said by a woman who had watched me manage a household budget for 6 years. Pay every bill, every insurance renewal, every quarterly tax filing, because her son could not be trusted with a checkbook, and everyone in the family knew it and no one said it. She handed the judge a story. The judge weighed it against my part-time schedule and the absence of a current salary, and he sided with the story. I left that courthouse with $85,000 and a 9-year-old verdict that I was not equipped to handle money. I want to tell you what I did with $85,000, not to impress you, but because the number is the whole point when Claudia says it in a ballroom. The first thing I did was get my real estate license, $400 and 6 weeks. I passed on the first attempt. The second thing I did was get my broker's license, which took another year, and a state exam that I passed on the first attempt, which I mention not to show off, but because Claudia's testimony had told me I was incapable, and I had started keeping receipts. With $30,000 of the settlement, I bought a distressed duplex in a neighborhood nobody was paying attention to yet. I fixed what I could fix myself. I hired out the rest. I had both units rented before I had finished paying the contractor. I reinvested. I found a partner, a woman named Dara, who had capital and no available hours. I had hours and enough knowledge to put her capital to work. We bought 3 more properties over 2 years, then a small commercial strip, then a warehouse I turned over in 18 months for a return that made Dara look at me the way people look at you when the bet they placed comes in larger than they expected. I incorporated Vargas Capital Partners in my 5th year, just me and Dara at first, then a 3rd partner, then 8 staff, then 12. We moved into a real office. I put my name on the door the way Eduardo Rivera had put his name on his door 30 years before me, except I had done it in 5 years, from $85,000, and a judge's formal opinion that I was not fit to manage it. By the time of Sophia's quinceañera, Vargas Capital Partners managed $43 million in assets. We were boutique, not giant, but we were known in the right rooms. And in the week before my daughter's 15th birthday, I had been closing the largest deal of my career, a $27 million mixed-use commercial development on the east side of the city. My firm was providing equity financing. The developer was a man named Robert Maines. We had been corresponding for 4 months, had been in the same conference room twice, and had exchanged something close to 300 emails, most of them about numbers, which is the language I prefer above all others. We signed the term sheet on the Tuesday before Sophia's party. The formal close was set for the following Friday. I want you to sit with the timeline for a moment. Tuesday, I signed a $27 million term sheet with Robert Maines. Thursday, my daughter turned 15 in a ballroom I had booked and decorated and paid $65,000 for, by a check with my name on it. And somewhere in the days between, the subcontractor budget for Robert's development had crossed my desk for approval, as significant expenditures at that stage always did. The list of awarded contractors included one general construction management firm. Rivera Construction, Eduardo Rivera, owner, $2.1 million. My ex-father-in-law's company. The family business I had been adjacent to for 6 years and erased from for 9. Awarded a contract through Robert's office on the merits of their bid, funded by the firm I had built from the money a judge had decided was all I deserved. I approved it. I want you to understand that clearly. Rivera Construction's proposal was competitive. Their track record was solid. They won legitimately, through Robert's office, without any interference from me. I did not inflate the contract out of guilt, and I did not cut it out of spite. I approved it the way I would approve any legitimate vendor, clean and on the merits, and I closed the file. I told no one. Some information does not need to be delivered in advance. Some information is better left to arrive on its own schedule, in its own room. Before we get to Thursday night, drop a word in the comments. The word is 65. Leave it below if you are still with me, and I will tell you exactly what happened when the Rivera family walked into a ballroom that the woman they called Incompetent had paid $65,000 to throw. Sophia had been planning her quinceañera for 8 months, which for a 15-year-old is not unusual, but is unusual when the 15-year-old maintains a color-coded spreadsheet with vendor contacts, deposit deadlines, and a column she named Vibes that I chose not to question. She got the spreadsheet habit from me. I told her that once, and she looked at me the way teenage daughters look at their mothers when the compliment has accidentally revealed something slightly embarrassing about both parties. We left it there. The hotel ballroom was $18,000 to rent. The catering, which Claudia Rivera would spend 3 weeks telling people was overpriced, came to $22,000. The dress was $4,200. The flowers, the music, the photographer, the court of honor. The decorations Sophia and I had argued about with great shared affection for 6 months. The total came to $65,000 and some change. Every invoice paid by me. I tell you this not to perform the number, but because Claudia Rivera sat at a table I had set, under flowers I had chosen, eating food I had paid for, and still managed to make a comment to the woman at the next table about whether the room could not have been a little larger. I had set places for Eduardo and Claudia at a good table, close to the dance floor. Sophia loves her father's parents the way children love people who have only ever been grandparents to them, never adversaries. She did not know what had happened in that courtroom when she was 5. I had never asked her to choose sides. I had chosen, a long time ago, to let her love whoever she wanted and to handle Claudia myself, privately, with distance. Marco arrived with his girlfriend, 26, visibly nervous about the room's assessment of her. I felt nothing about it, which no longer surprised me. Eduardo found me near the entrance and shook my hand, firm and efficient, a contractor's handshake. He said the room looked beautiful. He meant it. Eduardo had always been more honest than his wife, which made him less interesting. Claudia arrived in cobalt and kissed my cheek and told me I looked tired. I thanked her. I had learned years ago that Claudia's observations, delivered as concern, were always inventories. She was cataloging what had held and what hadn't, running her assessment of me the way she always had. I let her run it. I had larger things to think about. Sophia found me by the photo station at 7, grabbed both my hands the way she has since she was 4. "Mom," she said, just that. "Mom," I understood it completely. I straightened her crown. I told her she was the most prepared person in the room, which was the highest compliment in our household. She laughed and went back to her court, and I stood there for a moment being quietly certain about everything it had cost to get us to that room, to that crown, to that laugh. Then the side doors opened, and Robert Maines walked in. I want to tell you what his face looked like when he crossed that threshold, and how quickly he read the geometry of the room he had just walked into. But first, there is something I had not yet understood. Standing in that entrance watching my $27 million business partner walk into my daughter's quinceañera as Eduardo Rivera's guest. I did not know that connection existed. Nothing in 4 months of correspondence had suggested their paths crossed socially. I would learn the explanation later, and I will tell you in a few minutes because it changes the shape of the whole evening. The first hour of the quinceañera passed the way Sophia had color-coded it to pass. The court of honor entered on time. The waltz was flawless. The father-daughter dance, which I had been slightly dreading, was graceful enough to make me proud of both of them. Robert had taken a seat near the back at a table with Eduardo and 2 people I did not recognize. He had not approached me. I had noticed him noticing me, and I had noticed him choosing not to close the distance, which told me he was a careful man, which I already knew, and that he understood the geography of a room better than most people would, which I appreciated even more. For that first hour, I told myself the evening was going to hold its shape. That Robert would finish his dinner, congratulate Eduardo, and leave without Claudia ever learning who he was. That Eduardo, who had known what I did for a living since I told him myself 3 years ago over coffee off the highway, would keep that information where it belonged for one evening. I had 1 glass of champagne. I watched my daughter move through the room with the confidence of a girl who had grown up watching her mother navigate harder ones. I thought, this is going to be a clean night, a happy one. Just this once, the story gets to stay simple. That was the last thought I had before Claudia decided to improve the evening. Before I tell you what she said, I need you to pick a side. Drop Team Alina or Team Claudia in the comments right now. Because what I am about to tell you is going to make one of those choices feel very uncomfortable, and I want to know which way you were leaning before you heard it. Claudia found me near the dessert table at the end of the first hour. She was holding wine and wearing the expression she reserves for conversations where she has already decided how they will go. She told me the party was lovely. She said Sophia looked stunning. Then she said, in the voice of a woman doing me a favor, that Eduardo had mentioned I was doing something in real estate these days. Something small. Apartments, was it? Real estate investment, I told her. She nodded the way people nod when they have filed information somewhere unimportant and are moving on. Then she spotted Robert across the room, standing near Eduardo, and something shifted in her face. I had watched Claudia make this calculation, 100 times over 6 years of Sunday dinners. Here was a man in a good suit with the bearing of someone who handled real money, and Claudia Rivera, who organized her entire social life around proximity to that kind of man, wanted to introduce herself. She turned to me as an afterthought. "Come," she said. "Eduardo has a new business contact I want to meet. Very successful development. You might find it interesting. You can come along." She said it the way she said everything to me, as though I were a pleasant addition to the evening, adjacent to its real purpose. So I set down my glass and I followed Claudia Rivera across the ballroom toward the man who had my signature on a $27 million term sheet. I could have stopped it. I had the whole walk across that ballroom. Maybe 4 seconds, maybe 5, to lean toward Claudia and say quietly, "I know this man. We are in the middle of a major deal. Let me handle this." I did not. I told myself it was because there was no graceful way to explain it on that walk, without creating exactly the scene I was trying to avoid. But the honest answer is simpler. I had spent 9 years as Claudia Rivera's cautionary tale, her careful evidence that some women were not equipped for the serious world. And I was 4 seconds away from watching that story meet the only person in the room who could end it on her behalf. So I let the 4 seconds pass. I let her walk me across her own mistake. Robert saw us coming from the other side of the room. I watched his eyes find mine, then move to Claudia, then back to me. I watched him go still. He waited. Claudia arrived in front of him the way she arrived in front of anyone she considered worth impressing. All warmth, all intention. "Mr. Maines," she said, "I'm Claudia Rivera, Eduardo's wife. He speaks so highly of you." Robert shook her hand with the formal courtesy of a man gathering information from all directions simultaneously. Then Claudia turned, and she set her hand on my arm the way she always had when presenting me to someone, lightly, at the elbow, as though steadying a lesser object before it was examined. And she introduced me to Robert Maines the way she had been introducing me for 9 years. "This is Alina," she said, "my former daughter-in-law. She does something in real estate, small apartments, property management, that sort of thing. We have Sophia together, our granddaughter, which is why we're all here tonight." Then she smiled at Robert with the smile she was most proud of, the one that said she had given him all the relevant information and was ready to move to more interesting subjects. Robert looked at Claudia. He looked at me. He looked back at Claudia. And then he said, very carefully, "Mrs. Rivera, I think we may actually know each other through your daughter-in-law." Claudia's smile held. She gave a small, gracious laugh. "Is that right? What a small world." Robert reached into his jacket and placed a business card on the high top table between them, not handed to her but set between them, the way you set down something you want 2 people to read at the same time. "I'm with Maines Development," he said. "We're currently in the final stage of closing a $27 million mixed-use project on the east side of the city." He paused one. "Beat. Vargas Capital Partners is our equity financing partner on the deal. Your daughter-in-law's firm." The smile on Claudia's face stayed in place the way a light stays on after the power has gone out, running on whatever charge was left in the circuit. "I signed the term sheet with Alina on Tuesday," Robert said. "It's the largest project my company has undertaken in 4 years." He said it simply, not to wound her. He was simply not willing to let what she had just said stand uncorrected in front of him. He was a plain-spoken man, and she had said a plainly incorrect thing. Claudia's hand was still on my arm. I felt it go from resting to gripping without her noticing the change. "That's," she started. She stopped. The property management comment had returned to her first, before it had reached anywhere else in the room. She had said it to the man who had just called me his financing partner on a $27 million deal. She looked at me. I did not say anything. I had not said a single word through any of it. I simply stood there in the dress I had chosen for my daughter's quinceañera and let the room do what the room was going to do. Behind Claudia, Eduardo had drifted close enough to hear the last part. I watched him put it together. Vargas Capital Partners, Alina's firm. The same firm name on the contract approval he had received 3 weeks ago for the Rivera construction subcontract. the $2.1 million contract, both things now legible in the same light for the first time. He looked at me over Claudia's shoulder, and what moved through his face was different from what was moving through hers. Claudia was still trying to rewrite the scene. Eduardo was simply doing the arithmetic. 3 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. The same question Claudia had never bothered to ask. How long had I known? Whether the ground had shifted under them gradually or all at once. It had shifted all at once, 9 years ago, in a courtroom. The rest was just the math working itself out. Claudia found her footing within a minute. She was a woman who had managed social situations her whole life, and she managed this one with the particular discipline of someone who cannot admit a mistake, but has learned how to absorb one in public. She said graciously that clearly she had not known the full picture. She said it with a small laugh aimed at Robert, trying to make her ignorance charming. Robert did not make it charming for her. He was polite. He did not add to it. But he looked at Claudia and said, simply, you should be very proud of her. She has built something significant. 7 words. That was the sentence Claudia Rivera had no social tool for, not because it was unkind. Because it was plain and it came from the exact man she had been trying to impress, and it was directed entirely at the daughter-in-law she had spent 9 years handling as a footnote. Eduardo looked at his phone. He found a reason to look at his phone. I let the moment finish on its own. And then, because Sophia had spotted me from across the room and was making the face she makes when she wants me for the cake, I excused myself. Before I stepped away, I said one thing to Claudia. Not loud, just between us. I said, I have never been bad with money, Claudia. I was just managing it in places you weren't watching. Then I went to stand beside my daughter for the cake. Later, after Sophia's friends had taken several hundred photographs and the ballroom was clearing and the flowers were being wrapped to take home, Robert Maines found me by the coat check. He said he was sorry if he had caused any disruption. I told him he had not caused a disruption. He had simply told the truth in a room where it was long overdue. He said, with a slight dryness, that he had recognized my name in 4 months of emails long before he recognized my face that night. He had not known the Rivera connection. When he had walked in as Eduardo's guest, it had taken him a full minute to understand the shape of the room he had entered. I told him I had not known either, not until the contractor budget crossed my desk. He looked at me. He said, "So you knew before tonight?" I said yes. He thought about that. Then, "And you approved the contract anyway?" I said yes. Because the contract was not about any of this, I told him. It was about the work. Eduardo Rivera's firm is good at what they do, and the number was competitive, and that is the entire job. Knowing which category a thing belongs to and not mixing them up. Robert looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who has just learned something about the person he is doing business with, something that made him more confident in the decision he had already made. He said he would see me at closing on Friday. I said he would. I found Sophia by the exit, still in her dress, crown slightly tilted the way it gets after 3 hours of being hugged by everyone she loves. I straightened it the way I had straightened every small thing in her life for 15 years. The crown, Sophia said. Always, I told her. We walked out into the November air together, and I thought about the sentence at the beginning of this story. The one Claudia said and could not unsay, in a ballroom full of 200 people, at a party I paid for. She had told the man who calls my firm his most significant equity partner that I had never been good with money. 9 years before that night, I left a courthouse with $85,000 and a formal verdict. I had not appealed it. I had not sent Claudia a letter. I had not called her friends or posted anything or asked anyone in that family to reconsider who they had decided I was. I had simply gone and built the answer, and the answer had needed no delivery. It had arrived on its own, carried across a hotel ballroom by a man in a good suit who had no idea he was walking into the final page of a story that had started 9 years before he ever heard the name Vargas. Sophia tipped her head onto my shoulder in the car. She had the particular exhaustion of someone who has been celebrated for 4 hours straight. "Mom," she said, "what did you and Abuela talk about tonight?" I thought about that for a moment, about what the truthful answer actually was. "Business," I said. We talked about business. She made the soft sound she makes when she plans to ask again in the morning. One day, when she is old enough to understand that the world will try to hand you other people's verdicts about who you are, and that the only answer worth giving is the one you build, I will tell her the whole thing. But that night, I let her sleep in the car, crown slightly tilted, the flowers from her own quinceañera in her lap, while I drove us home. If this story landed somewhere real for you, share it tonight with one person who is still waiting for the people who dismiss them to finally change their minds. Tell them to stop waiting. The answer to a verdict like that is never an argument. It is a license, a company, a door that opens in a direction no one saw coming, built quietly, finished before anyone noticed it had started. I was called incompetent in court. I was handed a number and told it was all I was worth. I took that number, and I turned it into 43 million reasons why the verdict was wrong. Hit subscribe if you want to follow this channel. Like this video if it earned it. And leave a comment telling me the last person who underestimated you and what you are building to prove them wrong. I read every single one. I will see you in the next story.